Welcome in this short video on the types of sentence structure. Within the construction of sentence, we have two types of verbs, stative verbs and dynamic verbs. And each one of these verbs could be intensive and extensive. So the first thing that we need to know is the difference between stative verbs and dynamic verbs, and then the difference between intensive verbs and extensive verbs. In simple words, stative verbs are verbs that refer to the state of being. They don't refer to an action. While dynamic verbs are called activity verbs and they denote actions. Stative verbs are verbs of, for example, sensation like feel, like, dislike, hate, or recognition verbs like recognize, imagine. Dynamic verbs are activity verbs like cut, play, drink, write. So stative verbs could be either intensive or extensive. Intensive verbs are verbs that refer to what the subject is, while extensive verbs, they refer to what the subject is doing, and you can feel the difference. When we say that intensive verbs refer to what the subject is, so they should be followed by an adverbial or subject complements. But when we say that extensive verbs, they refer to what the subject is doing, so they refer to the doing of the subject, so they should be followed by an object. If you see sentence 1, she's in London now, is a stative verb because it refers to a state of being. It does not refer to an action. It is an intensive stative verb because it's followed by an adverb of place, which is London. So is an intensive stative verb. In sentence 2, she is a student, is here is followed by a subject complement. It is a stative verb because it refers to a state of being. It's not an action verb. And it is an intensive verb because it is followed by a subject complement, which is a student. While in sentence 3, John had the exclusion, the verb here is a stative verb because it does refer to an action, but it is an extensive stative verb because it's followed by what? By an object, the exclusion. So had here is an extensive stative verb. Now we move to the dynamic verbs. Dynamic verbs are verbs which are called the activity verbs. They denote actions. And these could be intensive and extensive too. Intensive dynamic verbs, like for example, sentence 4, universities became famous. Became here is a dynamic verb because it denotes a change from one shape to another shape, or a change from one state to another state. So it is a dynamic verb. But it is an intensive dynamic verb because it's followed by a subject complement, which is famous. Famous describes universities. So became here is a dynamic verb, and it is an intensive verb because it's followed by a subject complement. So it is an intensive dynamic verb. In sentence 5, they ate the meat. Ate here is a dynamic verb, and it is an extensive verb rather than intensive verb because it's followed by an object, the meat. So ate is an extensive dynamic verb, and since it's followed by an object, the meat, so it's a transitive verb. Right. What transitive verb is it? Is it followed by one object, so it's mono? Is it followed by two objects, so it is di? Is it followed by a direct object and object complement, so it is a complex, transitive, extensive, dynamic. So ate here is a dynamic verb. It is extensive because it's followed by an object, so it's transitive. And since we do have only one object, so it is a mono, transitive, extensive, dynamic verb. See sentence 6. He offered her some chocolates. The verb offer here is a dynamic verb. Right, because it refers to an action. Okay, so it's extensive. Why? Because it's followed by an object. That's fine. How many objects do we have? We do have two objects. The direct object, chocolates, and the indirect object, hair. So it is a transitive, extensive dynamic verb. Okay, what about the sentence number 7? In 7 we do have the verb elect, and the verb elect is a dynamic verb. And the question why? The answer, because it is or it denotes an action. And this verb is an extensive verb. Why? Because it's followed by an object, him. So elect is an extensive dynamic verb. Now, is it followed by one object? No, so it's not monotransitive. Is it followed by two objects? Of course no, so it's not a ditransitive. Is it followed by an object complement? Yes, Chairman. So in this way, elect is a complex, transitive, extensive dynamic verb. And finally, we do have the sentence 8, the train had a ride. In this sentence, we don't have any complement, and the predicate is only an action verb. So if we have an action verb, that's not followed by any object, so it is intransitive, extensive, dynamic verb. So all in all, stative verbs are either intensive or extensive. If a stative verb is followed by an object, an adverbial or subject complement, so it is intensive stative verb. If it's followed by an object, so it is extensive stative verb. Dynamic verbs could be intensive or extensive. If a dynamic verb is followed by only subject complement, so it is intensive dynamic verb. If a dynamic verb is followed by an object, it could be either one object, so monotransitive extensive dynamic verb, two objects, so ditransitive extensive dynamic verb, or object and object complement. In this way, it's a complex transitive extensive verb. If a dynamic verb is followed by nothing, so it is intransitive extensive dynamic verb. Thank you very much, and please subscribe for future videos.